Hello and welcome everybody. This is class number 4 of Buddhist Psychology. I really appreciate everybody's participation thus far. All of the conversation, questions that people have been asking and the contributions to the conversation thus far has been great. It makes me feel like it would be good for me to add a few more classes here to this, just so we can cover everything. Because as I'm putting the notes together for this evening, I was like, oh my gosh, we're on number 4 already. It feels like we haven't really kind of gotten into things yet. So without further ado, let's get into things. As always, I'm going to be, how should we say, a lot of the focus will be on the blackboard, and I'll just have the little icon on the side of myself, so I won't see everybody's faces, and this is part of your own protection. So feel free to just unmute yourself and just chime in if you have a question or a reflection or something like that. That's always appropriate. Okay, let us begin. Okay. Everybody can see this okay? All right, good. So let's get into it. So first off, a little bit of a, how should we say, alert. Just want to alert people to the fact, let's see, last week it was brought up a question about, hey, who's contraindicated for this type of work? So if people go to the Google Classroom, I recently uploaded up a few articles that explore various ends of this. There's a screener involved for those people that are interested in working with clients and such doing mindfulness, so how to screen for certain contraindications. There's a research paper on that. There's 2 of them that actually look at adverse effects of mindfulness, discussion on contraindications, and discussion on trauma-informed mindfulness. So people who are interested, clinicians here who are interested in incorporating mindfulness into their practice, I think that those are some resources that are available for you. I think that we're ethically bound to definitely take into all of those considerations. Now then, I hope that I'm getting everybody's kind of asking to be admitted. I think last week a couple of people didn't get into the classroom. I hope that it's not this whole screen share. I'm missing out on it, but well, reward to those who have made it here on time. Okay, so just like last week, I'm having this kind of 3-level conversation. So on one level, there's going to be a foundational Buddha Dharma lens. Some people are coming here that might not have much of a traditional Buddhist background. Some people might be just coming in cold. Hey, what is this mindfulness thing? Other people might be coming in with more of a secular mindfulness background, mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindful self-compassion, et cetera, where a lot of the elements of Dharma might have been, those tracks are kind of covered so that they can fit within secular clinical environments, classrooms, et cetera, et cetera. So there is an emphasis, I'd like to put an emphasis on old school Buddha Dharma. So that's what that BD means. Then sometimes we're looking at things through this clinical lens, and I kind of adjusted it this week to have that CL/DP for also deep practitioners. So I think that, a lot of the languaging begins to overlap there. And of course, there's the traditional Abhidhamma. So again, I was intending for this to be a little bit more traditional Abhidhamma. In the beginning, there's a little bit more of reflections from people about clinical applications. So I've kind of pulled back a little bit from Abhidhamma, a little bit more of that lens of clinical applications and such and considerations. And it's going to be a little bit more on that side today. So previously, last week, shamatha and metta, that's what we're focusing on in terms of using the shamatha and metta practices as building resources for yourself, for just practitioners in general, for clients that you may work with. It is always good to know how to lighten up Yeah, in practice, sometimes things can get heavy. Sometimes when we are doing some deeper insight work, um, a lot of material can come up. Sometimes things can potentially, um, well, it's entirely possible that we can touch upon material that is potentially destabilizing or alarming. So how is it that we can deeply? How is it that we can alter the trajectory of our practice into lightening up or into moving towards, infusing our experience with more kindness and equanimity? So that helps to reinforce skill sets of self-regulation and also stimulate positive neural pathways. Yeah? So all of those things are available if we take time to go into our shamatha metta practice. Sorry. As always, at this time of evening, Cupcake the cat and Frederick the possum are sharing their bowl of food together. Okay, so today I wanted to look a little bit more at the Vipassana practice. Yeah. So as always, for some people who have studied with me for some time, this may be review, and for some of us, this may be new. So for the people for whom this is review, just reflect upon your own practice. How is it that you have grown and deepened your wisdom with respect to the subject matter for tonight? So I just want to go back to looking at, make sure that everybody here is in here, that there's not people that are stuck in the waiting room. Okay, looks like we're all good to go. Back to the blackboard. All right, so here we go. Looking at Vipassana practice, Vipassana, meaning to see clearly or to see through. To see clearly, how is it that we can have a greater sense? How is it that we can have greater sensory clarity within our experience? How is it that we can see things within a higher definition? Yeah. How is it that we can work through some of the nebulosity of the subjective experience of trying to work through this undifferentiated mass of suffering, confusion, and delusion, and be able to discern how things really are. Yeah? So there's also that to see clearly, but there's also that aspect of to see clearly as to see through. Yeah. So oftentimes, what are we seeing when we're going through the day? What are we seeing when we're looking at life? Are we seeing things as they are? Are we seeing things clearly? Or are we, how should we say, just looking at some of our ideas, our projections, our perceptions that may be a little off, that may be a little unskillful? Yeah. So there's practice of vipassana, of insight, is how is it that we can see through that? So it becomes a little more transparent. So with this, I like to start off with this, this term right here. I say this a little tongue in cheek, but there's been a number of kind of secular clinical locations that they said, hey, yeah, do something on mindfulness. That's fine. But, just kind of ease up on the don't be too Buddhisty or use any of that, languaging stuff. So I say, okay, great. So I usually go to the whiteboard and the first thing I write, all right, today we're going to look at liberation from samsaric rebirth. And of course, the first reaction is, boy, that is uber Buddhisty, but let's look at it. So what does that mean by liberation? Yeah. So if we're liberated from something, it means prior to being liberated, we are shackled, we were bound, we were caught, we're held hostage by something. Yeah. So liberation is being able to break free from that which previously has bound us. Yeah. So we're looking for an unbinding, and actually, literally, within the suttas, unbinding is a term used quite frequently, a synonym for the awakening, enlightening process, unbinding. So samsara, literally translated, means a worldly wandering. Yeah. So if we contrast that to the sense of dharma, which means, well, it's essentially, there's a lot of metaphors of the path. How is it that we can have this path? Buddha teaches, he said, I teach only one thing, suffering and the cessation of suffering. Kind of two things, but there's this path leading to the end of suffering. So contrast that to samsara. It's this worldly wandering. It's like the mosquito around the light bulb, or the moth around the light bulb. It has this, doesn't know where it's going. It's just this erratic flight pattern. And that is essentially the path that we lead if we are going through life with, well, if we're not given, how shall we say, an ethical basis or a map or some way to live life, we essentially try to avoid pain and pursue pleasure in order to have a sense of happiness. Can I minimize the amount of unpleasant experiences and increase the amount of pleasurable experiences? That equals happiness, I think a lot of us assume. Yeah, but for many of us who've tried that path, it leads to a lot of confusion. It leads to a lot of chaos. It leads to a lot of potential destruction as well. So samsara, the worldly wandering, it's our attachment to our discontent, or the actions that create discontent, and this way that we're just kind of lost within that. Yeah? So rebirth, not necessarily meaning I'm being born again in terms of reincarnation, but looking at it at this deeper level of, there's a repetitive surfacing of a particular ego structure, or a pattern of self that's formed around suffering. So after Buddha's awakening, as he was formulating his theoretical lens and his whole concept around suffering and what is it, a core element to it is there's always a very strong sense of I am whenever there's a suffering moment happening. The greater the discontent, the greater the displeasure, the greater the distress, the greater and more solid this view of self. Yeah. So we could take this term liberation from samsaric rebirth and be like, what does that mean? Well, we could translate it variously to mean, well, what we're looking for is freedom from being bound to our deeply conditioned repetitive patterns of discontent that influence this view of self and world. That makes it a lot more universal. Yeah. So all of us experience stress throughout the day. Everybody we know experiences stress. Stress is not something that we have necessarily a choice about, or how should we say, maybe the challenges that the world throw to us. We're limited into the degree of how we can influence circumstances to how much challenging things the world throws at us. So the experience of that is stress. So stress and stressors are universal, but how it impacts and influences each of us is quite individual. We all deal with stress differently. Yeah. And we can look at that, how we experience stress, how others experience stress as, as just the patterns of self, conditioned patterns of self. Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of give this kind of secular Dharma view of what we're kind of looking for. I'm kind of framing the conversation for tonight, so to speak, within the context of this insight practice. So another quote that I like, it's said variously within the suttas, early writings, the goal of the practice is to uproot avijja sankhara. So again, those that have studied with me a bit, I have a sense of maybe where the conversation is going tonight. So what does that mean? Well, to uproot something. If you got a plant, I've got this neighbor right behind. He's got this amazing wisteria bush. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. The springtime, all these little bell flowers just cascading over the fence. It's wonderful. But that thing is perniciously aggressive in its growth patterns, and it has absolutely no sense of boundaries. It's growing through the fence. It is coming under the ground and just breaking everything because it's a really aggressive plant. So just constantly cutting it back is not going to do anything to it. Got to take that shovel, get into the dirt, get to the root ball, and then pull that out in order for that wisteria to not be growing up and kind of destroying things back here. So we need to uproot. So uproot the avijja sankhara. Let's get into those things. Sankhara, what does that mean? Again, I like to go to the original Pali language because we just do not have good English terms. for a lot of what is being discussed here. So I think that it's helpful to go to the old school languaging because it helps to give definitions that kind of round out and add dimension to things. So literally, sankhara means formations or fabrications, anything that's created. Another word, mental imprint. I think that that's really a good one. I'd say another one, I don't have it here, but a sense impression. I think that's a good one as well. I'll be using that one. Sometimes it's referred to as a volitional formation, meaning, well, what does this mean? A formation, a fabrication, a mental imprint, a sense impression, an idea, a concept, a thought, something that then has a charge to it that may lead to an impulse, that may lead to a motivation. Yeah. So sometimes they're referred to as volitional formations because there's some volition or intent that it may carry with it, or it may trigger. The uprising of a certain idea might then trigger an emotional reaction. That emotional reaction might trigger a memory. That memory might then lead into a fantasy story. So there's these formations, these things that are being created in the mind and the body at all times. So there's some volition, there's some intents behind that create conditions for future arisings. So this is how we rattle through the day. We have various thoughts and ideas and sensations and emotions that then lead to the next, lead to the next, lead to the next. And so what we were looking at in the ideas of the chittas and the cetasikas is, they all kind of, or really the citta more so, just that rapid fire movement of the different aspects of mind that maps together this sense of continuity. So as we go through the day, there's this also rapid fire uprising of the sankharas in different ways and different experiences. Some are more bodily, some are more mental. And we're not necessarily aware of them happening. And yet we are variously buying into them, so to speak, as true, as real. So our perceptions, our interpretations, our projections that are happening. Okay, so here's a little doodle here. I often roll out for this discussion. So sankhara, the formations or the sense impressions. So I have this idea. Here's a little flower, pretty little flower. It's got its leaves, it's got its roots. So sense impression. That's a term that I like because it's a momentary impression that arises in the thoughts that arise. Oh, there's my mind's eye is projecting various images that I see. It's just a faint momentary impression. Oh, and then there's an internal commentary in the hearing space of the mind. It's just, there's some phrase that goes along with it. It's the auditory component that kind of moves along with or responds to the image. Oh, and then it might kind of arise or trigger something that arises in the body, a particular joy or fear or tension of some way. These are just the momentary passings of sensations, the sense impressions. Yeah, that can happen. Yeah, but there's something about them that are very subjective. Yeah, it's rather than somebody bumping into you. Well, yeah, that's a formation. Your body is feeling that impact. But these sense impressions are a little bit more subjective, a little bit more about something that you are creating or that's being created in your mind and body. Another reason why I like sense impression is because another definition or connotation of impression is imprint. So let's go down to this root system, the sense imprints. Well, we can have various impacting experiences that form our views and perceptions. So we could have particular traumas that we go through, or just conditioning that happens, conditioning in families, attachment patterns, or just, life experiences, be they positive or negative, that begin to show our influence a sense of how we view the world. Yeah. So as these sense imprints are kind of, literally imprinted on our nervous system in many cases, they're influencing the flavor and content of the momentary sense impressions that arise. Yeah. So there's that idea of the sense impressions. let's see, a story that I like to tell that's related to this. You know, how shall we say? Um, when I was younger, literally grew up with the train running through my backyard. And I thought that my parents did a really good job of kind of handling this kind of very intense sensory experience of the train running by so many times a day, where they said, "Hey, Mike, you know what? You got an uncle, Billy. He loves you so much, but he's just really busy all the time because he runs the railroad. He's a train conductor. So whenever you hear the train and you hear the choo choo, that's your uncle, and he's just saying, "Hey, Mike, I love you, but I'm so busy. But one day we'll get together, we'll play. I'll bring balloons. It'll be amazing." So I heard that as a young child, and whenever the train would pass by and I would hear the horn, I would just be filled with love and excitement. And I'd run to the window and I'd be like, "Hey, Uncle, one day we'll actually meet, and that's going to be a wonderful day." So that's an experience that made an impression on me, that then there's a sense of a repetition, because every time the train happened, those particular sankharas would arise and they'd be reinforced, and it would influence my view and perception. Yeah. Contrast that experience, had a neighbor who had a dog. His dog was his whole life. He loved the dog so much. One day the dog got out, ran onto the tracks, got hit by the train. It was a horrible day. All the kids were playing in the yard, and we all witnessed it in the aftermath of his dog passing away in this horrendous accident. And I remember a few times playing with him afterwards, and the trainer would run by and he would just kind of stop and pause and kind of shudder. And I can see his grief and the intensity of that experience, as he's had, yeah, an impacting experience that influences how he views the train. Yeah. So as an adult, I drive to, well, back when I drove to work, um, I would stop at the train station or stop at a train. The lights would go red and I'd see the train pass by. And still to this day, I can notice a subtle uprising of various sankharas related. Oh, there might be a subtle joy, a subtle curiosity. Yeah. I would imagine possibly that boy that was a childhood friend at the time, maybe he's somewhere having moments where he's stopping from the train, and he's having some rather negative experiences of sadness or a sense of loss or grief when the train runs by. Yeah. So there's that idea of the sankharas, the sense imprints that happen that begin to influence our view. Yeah. So this is something that we can relate to. Yeah. These are formative experiences that happen that give us a sense of perception, give us a sense of how it is that we see things, experience the world a little differently. Um, Conversely, or not conversely, but on a side note, I remember some years ago just sitting down with my parents and saying, "Well, I think you guys did a really good job parenting there." You know, creating that connection in my mind with the train. And my mom's just like, "No, what the hell? No, you really do have Uncle Billy, and the son of a bitch never showed up for any of the parties, never showed up for the birth announcement. The guy's a freaking freeloader. Forget that guy." So apparently he existed. Anyway, so that is the thing on sankharas. Does anybody have any questions on that? The mental formations, the momentary arisings. No? Okay, let's jump back into things. So I like to look at the way that I like to parse them out is, as we see here, the seeing, hearing, and feeling. We could look at them in terms of all of the senses, the taste and smell as well. Tasting and smelling, there's not quite as much potential for a self view that forms within that. Although they say that smell has a lot to do with triggering memory and such like that, but then it's more like the memory that arises that gives that sense of self within that. So the sankhara fuses together the subjective and objective relationship that forms one's subjective experience. Yeah. We need to have a clear contact and understanding of the sankharas. When we do, we can see things clearly. But unfortunately, going back to that term, goal of the practice is to uproot avijja sankhara. There's this avijja piece. So what does that mean? Avijja. It means ignorance. The problem is we all ignorant. So ignorance, or not seeing the sankharas for what they are, but rather mistaking them for the foundations of self-view. Yeah. So a little doodle I make whenever I talk about this one is, apparently when the mosquito comes to drink your blood, one of the first things that they do when they land on you is they actually inject you with a bit of anesthesia, so you don't notice that they're there. Yeah, because if they just came in and just pierced your skin and started drinking, we could feel it. We'd be like, "Ooh, go away. We don't want you here." Yeah. So in order for them to carry out their mission, they have to make us ignorant, unaware, numbed out, oblivious to this activity that's taking place. Yeah? So that's the avijja piece. There's this numbing effect that happens oftentimes when the various sankharas arise that numb out our discernment of what is taking place. It numbs out our mindfulness, and it allows the various sankharas to take root, yeah, to begin to distort our perception, drive our behavior. Yeah. So, just think of a time when you might have been walking down the street or, walking down a hallway, and you see something that triggers you in one way, or it activates your imagination or your memories, and then you're lost in a fantasy, or now you are off in some defensive anger posture or what have you. Yeah, it's like we didn't notice that there was this switch that happened. We didn't notice that these subtle arisings of seeing, hearing, and feeling have somehow grabbed our attention, and we just began to organize this whole self view around that. Yeah. So that's the avijja piece, is the fact that we're just not noticing. Yeah. So as we go through the day, as we go through the hour, as we go through the minute, there's all of these arisings of seeing, hearing, and feeling that when we don't look at them uh, distinctly, tends to congeal into this solid, permanent self view. Howsoever, if we're able to look at it clearly and directly, they tend to disentangle into just the momentary sensory uprising. Here's this emotion, and here is a particular image that's arising that might be inspired, triggered, associated with that emotion. And then here's the internal commentary that goes with that then triggers this next thing. Yeah. So there's all this activity that's taking place that begins to congeal together. So going back to, I believe, the class one, when we were looking at the traditional Buddhist aggregates, um, form, form, contact, feel, tone, consciousness, and one of them being the formations. This is the formations, yeah, and then perception being one of them as well. So we can see how strongly this formations are in terms of this self-view that occurs. So I really wanted to look at this today because of that term of uprooting of Vijja Sankara. Yeah. So when we're looking at our habit patterns, what are our habit patterns? How is it that we're reacting unconsciously to our anger, fear, sadness, hopelessness, disgust, shame, embarrassment? What happens to us? Well, can we fully appreciate the joy, love, humor, um, compassion, appreciation, and equanimity? Yeah. So the more clearly that we can be aware of these experiences, we can relate to them skillfully. Yeah. So this is what,
I have a question. Hey,
yeah,
it's Kenshin.
I can.
Um, I'm wondering, as you describe this, where where the stories arise. Like, I know that they may be filtered throughout, but a way I've worked is to locate a pattern of different stories that arise when things are triggered,
Uh-huh.
so that I see the self arising. Big sister, oh, there's big sister, right? And she has this narrative in that, and these feelings are associated. So to unpack the delusion Is that related to this uprooting that you're talking about?
So if I'm understanding you correctly, and this is kind of the knot in the experience, that the troubling thing. How is it that we can be aware of the changing of the guard, that this habit pattern has come up if it's kind of happening so subtly or quickly? So if I'm hearing you correctly, Kenshin, you're saying that you may notice certain kind of themes or distinct patterns themselves that you might give a name to. So, and within, once you kind of name it, you might kind of understand there's certain features to it that makes it individuated from other ones. And maybe when it arises, you can quickly give it a name as, I'm sorry, big sister, little sister, what you said.
Yeah, well, it's a conglomeration of see, hear, feel. It's
Yes.
feelings, thoughts, emotions, but there's a narrative to it. It's been triggered, right? And it's a set of stories that arise.
Yes.
And, and then you can look underneath and see the volitional aspect. Like,
Yes.
what's the driver? What's hiding underneath?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the sort of what I call the uprooting of the delusional associative patterns of the self arising, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's wonderful, because I always say to students and clients, like, know our patterns. It's good, for us to heal, to grow within our practice, or just towards happiness. Know what our patterns are. So this person over here might have more patterns related to anxiety. This person here might have certain patterns that show up in interpersonal experiences that are attachment related. So yeah, if we can identify certain distinct patterns and give a name to them, I think is great. So it's just like we're kind of operating like an automaton, and then there's some aspect of our mindfulness that says, oh, hold on a second, I think that this is blank pattern. Then it's just like the avijja starts to go away, and it's just like, aha, I see you. This is the story that's going on. This is the emotion that's behind it. I'm feeling how there's this self that's coming together that has a distinctly different objective and what it wants to do to achieve that objective. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I like.
yeah. And I think some people go from feeling to story. I see the selves as they arise, and then I dig into the feeling patterns,
Mhm.
and they're different sort of roles or selves that I might play, and there are times when I notice it that then they don't arise. And so then I enter a circumstance where usually I'll just use big sister because I'm back in my family of origin right now. And so I'm aware of that role. And sometimes I show up and she doesn't come with me, and my family is the same, and I'm not, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, you're
And
not falling into that habit pattern.
yeah, yeah. So the awareness itself has liberated me in some way by working with it in meditation and going through whatever I've gone through, to dislodge that so that there's no self arising
Yes.
for a moment, right? For a bit. Um,
Good. Oh, that's excellent. That's exactly what I'd like to discuss and pinpoint today. So thank you for giving some concrete examples of it and how you personally work with it. So yeah, so it tends to liberate itself just with that awareness.
yeah.
When we look at the sutras, there's various terms that Buddha uses referring to awakening, enlightenment, liberation, unbinding. Um, he'll talk about also the discernment release and awareness release.
Mm.
Yeah? So the discernment release is when we can clearly see something for what it is. It tends to we tend to drop that. We tend to unfixate from it. So as you were saying, Kenshin, that sense of, oh, I'm clearly seeing this big sister habit pattern, shoom, it just kind of filters away. It's kind of mask that it holds goes away. It's hiding from you goes away as well. The volition and the impulse that it holds tends to go away too. And then what you're left with is just the sensory impressions of the stories and maybe the emotions, and they tend to disentangle. Yeah? So that's the discernment release where we're piercing through the avijja. Yeah. Then the other would be the awareness release, which is, well, okay, and maybe this is the second part. Okay, I'm clearly seeing the sankharas, and I'm experiencing the volition, the urgency behind them. But there's the shamatha metta components that I'm bringing to it that just begin to calm that. So there's not this drive to whatever the habit pattern is telling us that needs to be done. So that's that awareness release, where it's just kind of like, the fuel just kind of peters out, or the wind drops out of the sail, and there's just left this empty husk or shell of a habit pattern that's just kind of, just kind of there, and isn't really doing anything. Cool. Thank you. Excellent reflection. Okay. So having said that, Kenshin giving an excellent example there of particular ways of working with it. If we can really get clear about like what are our habit patterns, and this is something that's like, it's good to work on. It's like good to just practice mindfulness for the sake of mindfulness. But if we can direct it towards a certain habit, then boy, we're really kind of getting into something. So sometimes I like to ask people, well, where is it that you find that you're tripping up? Where is it that you find that you're falling down? Where is it that you find that you get triggered? That might not be all day, every day, or maybe it is. So, sometimes I like to have people kind of write down different patterns. Oh, I get, stuck here, or, I have this avoidant pattern where I just can't do work, I can't get to things, or, in this particular type of relationship, I feel deeply that I don't matter, or that, I find that I talk too much, and that I kind of have to be the person that knows everything. It's good to kind of know these little places where we get caught. And then I like, as Kenshin was saying, give it a name, start to describe the features of it. And then we can see when that habit pattern wants to come up and kind of distort perception, drive behavior. Okay, so self-view. This is what we're talking about. There's different types of self-view that arise. A certainty of self and world concepts that happen. So they could be our beliefs, perceptions, interpretations of subjective experience. Yeah. So here's a term, the ego syntonic versus ego dystonic. Yeah. So so certain clinicians might be familiar with this one. So the ego syntonic means it's happening in my subjective experience, and I believe it. Versus ego dystonic, it's happening and I don't believe it. So it's like you're talking with somebody and they're like, oh yes, well, the heavens opened up and Mother Mary comes to me speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And the next question is, oh, okay, well, what did you do with that? What does that mean to you? Well, ego syntonic means, well, I completely believe it. It means, yes, it's true, it's happening. I believe this is happening. Ego dystonic would mean, yeah, well, it's happening. That means I'm off my meds. It's time for me to fill the prescription. Yeah. So that's, an example on that level of ego syntonic versus ego dystonic. But as like what we were discussing with Kenshin back and forth, and it's ego syntonic. It's like this habit pattern is coming up. We don't see it, and then it takes over. We believe fully in it. And it's like we put on that type of those color glasses and we see the world that way, as that habit pattern wants us to see, whether it's, at the basis some craving and want, if it's at the basis some aversion and repulsion, if it's at the basis some anxiety, what have you, versus the ego dystonic, it's like, I see it. I see the habit pattern. And of course, this is the emotion that comes with it. This is the ideas, the beliefs, but I'm not buying into it. That's when the habit begins to just start to fall away in that moment. And the more that we can continue to bring that mindfulness to it, and it's eroding really the neural pathways related to that self, the belief, the volitions, the actions. It's like there's an on ramp, there's the freeway, and an off ramp. And it's just like we just believe it, and we're just on that road. The more that we can kind of see what's going on and pull out of it, so to speak, it's like we're creating these other neural pathways that are kind of off ramps, so to speak. So we don't have to kind of follow through with whatever it is. I use that that idea of the freeway with we're creating all these more off ramps, kind of oftentimes when I'm talking about addictive
Mike,
behaviors. Yeah.
because when I think of egosyntonic and ego dystonic from a different viewpoint, from a clinical viewpoint, it's more like egosyntonic is something that I guess it almost feels like the opposite. We want to not just fall into those patterns and accept and agree with them, where normally we want to, like, I think clinically we want to be egosyntonic, right? I mean, unless I forgot something from my licensing exam many years ago.
No, not at all. Well, I guess the spirit of what I'm trying to convey is, if there's a habit pattern that increases our distress, if there's a habit pattern that that increases our sense of suffering, it would be good to see what underlies it, and maybe break through see clearly that habit pattern, so that we don't kind of believe it anymore. So the example that Kenshin was giving earlier of there's a habit pattern of big sister that I got the impression of when she's around her greater family structure, this older role that she played in the family with all its pluses and minuses to it, just cues up, and then that shows up when she's around her family. That's the gist I got from it. So that would be her believing it in a way that maybe doesn't really create joy for her. So the sense of, like, when she would notice, oh, here's the habit pattern, but I see it for what it is and I'm not believing in it, then it's like that habit pattern that probably held a lot of discontent for her isn't having this thrust or influence as much as it might have if she wasn't clearly seeing it.
I mean, it's almost in clinical work, we're trying to strengthen the ego.
Mhm.
And in the work I'm trying to do in my meditation practice, I'm trying to get less attached to the ego, less connected to self.
Mhm.
So, anyhow,
So how do you marry those two?
it
If one
just feels
says,
like it's a different. I completely understand what you're saying. It's just so interesting that we're trying to, as a therapist, I'm trying to kind of help strengthen people's sense of themselves.
yes,
And, in the work I'm doing personally, I'm trying to reduce my sense of self, which is a struggle.
yeah, yeah. So that's the interesting thing. It's like we want to strengthen that sense of self that is at the wheel, that is in the captain's chair there, to go through life. But then when we kind of look at, well, maybe that sense of self isn't kind of one person who's in charge, but it's a little subcommittee with various selves that want to disintegrate us. It would be good to kind of like see through some of those kind of d- discrete ego states that come up that might subvert what kind of the core ego um, that we'd like to identify with. Yeah. Does that kind of marry it a little bit better for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting dichotomy of just what I'm doing in my life. So it's just an interesting idea. I
Yeah.
just anyhow, but thanks.
Yeah, it's like we're wearing two different hats, so to speak. One is saying yay, the other is saying nay. But yes, the more that we look at that experience of ego, it becomes interesting. So, in the spirit of that, in order to properly examine self-view via vipassana, um, so we're not exploring. Oftentimes in therapy and clinically, we're looking at our story, aren't we? Yeah. What happened to us, how we responded to it, how we reacted, what we'd like to do, different ways that we're strengthening, who we are in that story. So contrast that to the meditation work. We're in this context looking at vipassana. We're trying to drop out of that. We're trying to move away from this egoic only interpretation of self, yeah, and drop into more of a sensory system experience of self. Yeah. So moment by moment, can I get in a stance where I can see clearly, oh, here comes this emotion, and then that passes away. Oh, and here comes this idea, and that passes away. And rather than engaging in any of it, engaging in any of the story, just kind of try to embody the sensory system and just observe the firings and how one thing that originates or arises then can trigger the next, that then triggers the next. And rather than kind of believing in any of it, just passing by and just kind of saying, oh, this is interesting, being curious about the experience. And part of the thing that happens when we're able to step back in that distance is we can start to see patterns that arise. Oh, isn't that interesting? When this idea arises, there's this particular emotion that happens, you know. Then we can pop back up into the story and into, form that sense of self, or we can continue to just maintain contact with this sensory activity. And then it's like we're really starting to see kind of, how the sausage is being made, of self. And we can see kind of the bugs in it and work on it kind of on this meditative kind of mindful way. Yeah. So more clearly we can see the avijja or within the, let's see, what am I saying in this one? Can more clearly see the movement of the nervous system and eventually see the habit patterns for what they are. Yeah. So the more we can clearly see the movement of the nervous system, then there's not that avijja, there's not the unconscious kind of change of the guard of these different discrete ego states that might want to disintegrate or subvert, or that are around a lot of our discontent. We can see it clearly, and we can eventually see these habit patterns for what they are. So this is a particular analogy that I like to use. How is it that we can drop out of our story? How is it that we can drop out of this narrative, the ideas that we have of self and world, and just hang out with our sensory experience? Well, so there's this acronym of CLEAR that I like. So moment by moment, how is it that you're experiencing this present moment? So C, contact. Can we be aware of the sensation, the sensory experience? Is it the seeing, the internal mind's eye projecting images, the hearing, the internal dialogue, the internal monologue, the internal talk? Is it a particular emotion or sensation in the body? Can we contact and be aware clearly of that sensory event? And labeling, I find that's very helpful in cultivating a continuity of mindfulness. Can we label what it is that I'm contacting right now? That helps us have that sense of objectivity that reinforces the sense of, oh, this is how I'm relating to it. This is an object of focus that I'm taking on right now. Right now, this is just a moment of seeing. This is now a moment of feeling. So that comes from the Mahasi tradition of insight practice. And then once we contact it and label it, can we explore it? How is this sensory? What is this sensory event? What are the qualities it has, the locations, the behavior, the boundaries that it takes up? How is it behaving? What does it want to do? And as whatever it is we're looking at is doing its thing, can we accept it? Can we bring a sense of equanimity and kindness to this subject-object relationship? Yeah, the subject, that which is perceiving, the thing being perceived. What's in that relationship? Is there a want for something else, this deep underlying craving? Is there this aversion? Oh, I don't like this. How can I get rid of this? Yeah. Can we look at what's going on in that relationship and instead lean into the sense of kindness, lean into the sense of acceptance and allowing of the sensory experience to unfold however it is that it wants to? And can we release, let go of any fixation, any grasping to build it into something else, or to linger on it and get fixated? How is it that we can let go of any fixation so we can enter new into the next moment? Yeah. So part of that mindfulness is, present time awareness. That's a term that we hear quite often. So part of it is being very clear about the moment and also letting go. Yeah. So does that make sense? CLEAR, that acronym, when we go into practice. Okay. So we can go into doing some sitting practice unless anybody has any questions about this. It's probably very kind of abstract, et cetera, until we kind of put it into play. All right. Let's allow yourself to come to a comfortable upright position. Allow yourself to straighten up and settle in. Settling into your posture, settling into this body. When you find a place of reasonable comfort, get in touch with an intention to maintain stillness. Not only settling into the body and posture, but settling into awareness. Can we contact this life force, this brightness, awakeness, aliveness experienced in mind and body? And can we take this as the seat of our practice? And can we begin to spend a few minutes cultivating shamatha, cultivating some concentration, so you can find your way towards the breath. So here's the building the resources here, noticing what are the pleasant qualities available in breath. Not the in breath, the top of the in breath, the out breath, the base of the out breath. Allow yourself to notice and give yourself permission to feel whatever is pleasant, gladdening, and balancing about the breath. So as we're hanging out, just being with breath, noticing the pleasant qualities, probably there's all sorts of other things happening. All things that want to distract us, the stories that want to run, the fantasy, planning, daydream. Good. This is what we're going to be looking at. So begin to open up this scope of focus to include the full body, the two arms, two legs, back in front of torso, neck, face, and head. This whole volume of space of the body. Can we feel into that, the various sensations that arise and fall? Some of the sensations are pressure on pressure sensations, aches, tensions, relaxations. Some of the sensations in the body are more emotive. The anger, fear, sadness, joy, love, humor, any and all emotive experiences can be felt in the body as well. But to reduce getting involved or identifying with them, we could just put it all under the umbrella of feel. Just observing the activity in feel space of the body. We can zoom out and have kind of this wide view of the activity of things happening in the body, or we could zoom into a facet of your experience, noticing one sensation in particular for a while. However, it is you want to be with this feeling space of the body, just notice, bring the sense of acceptance, allowing. And of course, as we're doing that, the mind is doing its thing. The fantasy, planning, daydream that's occurring. Let's open up the scope of focus to include that as well. Let's be clear about these various sense impressions happening in the mind. So, again, there's this activity of seeing images that rise and fall that the mind's eye projects onto this mental picture plane. So most people report it taking place around the eyes, the forehead. Just allow yourself to be aware of contact, this general seeing space of the mind's eye. It could be active, that is to say, various images occur, or it could be restful. You're just simply looking at the backs of your eyelids. But either way, just be aware of the seeing space of the mind. And thirdly, this other aspect of mind is what we hear, the internal talk, the internal commentary. Most people report this hearing space as an activity that occurs between the ears. Again, we can hear the words, the comments, the dialogues, the monologues, or it could be quiet in between the ears. Just sensitize yourself as well to this hearing space of the mind. Very good. So opening up this focus to include all of seeing, hearing, and feeling. Just moment by moment, what do you notice? Just be clear. Contact your experience. What's the most prominent thing for you right now? Seeing, hearing, or feeling? So we contact it, then we label. See, hear, or feel. So as I'm doing it, it might sound like this. Feel. See and feel. See. See and hear. Feel. And so on like that. Contacting, labeling. Contact, label, explore. As you're contacting that one sensory event, can you explore it? If it's a sensation in the body, where does it arise? Does it want to expand, contract, move, stay still? If it's the activity of mind, the image that arises, or the internal talk, is it clear? Is it subtle? Is it vibrant or foggy? So we contact it, we label it, we explore it, and all the while we bring a sense of acceptance. As you're exploring it, what's the relationship to it? Is there that capacity to infuse it with acceptance, equanimity? Or is there something else in the way, a craving for it or a craving for some other experience? An aversion to it or a want to avoid it? Can we open up, turn towards, infuse it with acceptance? Allow it to do whatever it needs to do without identifying with it or getting lost in it. Notice when you get caught up. Rather than just racing back to a technique, just notice waking up. The experience begins to individuate. Seeing becomes seeing, hearing becomes hearing, feeling becomes feeling. They tend to filter away as you arrive back in the present moment. Allow yourself to contact, label, explore, accept, and release. Don't fixate, congeal around, to get caught into anything. You can track a sensation for sure, hang out with it as long as you want to. Don't fixate it into something. If it wants to move, shift, expand, contract, cease to be, just allow it. Keep refreshing your experience of the present moment. Noticing what's it like when there's no arising. There's no sankharas arising, there's no activity in seeing or hearing. A sense of stability, equanimity and feel space? What is it like to be awake and aware, and not attached to anything when that occurs? Okay, at ease. Post-bell practice, rather than jumping back into self-view, can you allow yourself to be emptied out, open to continue to receive the merits of your actions? So what did you notice? What did you observe? What was relevant for you during this sit? And of course, any questions you may have about any of the material we might have covered. Just feel free to unmute yourself and manifest, as I might not see you.
I have a question about some of the material.
Yeah, Swati.
So I think it was Robert who was talking about how in clinical practice, we in fact try to strengthen the ego. And in Buddhist psychology, or the work that we are doing here, the non-self is in fact asking us not to be attached to a sense of self or a permanent self. So I think it is big, and there was like some reconciliation. So I think that when people come to do clinical work to the psychotherapist or clinician, I think a lot of times, not every time, a lot of times the sense of self is wounded. It could be because of a trauma or because of the nature and nurture combination. And when it is it's a very wounded self, I am not sure if no self is the right way to approach it in the beginning. To a certain degree, we do need to build up the sense of self. So the monks who went to, who were experiencing the no self or studying the no self, their goal or the reason they go there is very different than the ones who come to us in our clinical practice. So I think that, for example, if somebody has a wounded self, and if they start looking at their own sanskaras, it may be very painful. It may put them into something is so wrong with me type of spiraling down. Mm-hmm. So a lot of self-compassion or a work where, like a good sense of self is very useful before looking at the non-self doctrine.
Yes. Was there a question within that, or just kind of your
Yeah,
reflection?
I'm just kind of respond. It's a comment, and also, like, a question is, what do you think about this idea of like, when the no self is useful, like, to think about, there is not like one thing, and there are like different parts of us. To look at it that way is sometimes useful, like there are different parts of us.
Mhm.
And one part may be wounded and the other part may be strong. That may be one way to introduce the no self doctrine. But otherwise, just to, I mean, in other words, to look at our patterns also, we need to have certain objectivity, a certain strong sense of it's okay.
Mhm. Mhm. So I think that there's something. I thank you for that comment, Svati. I think that there's a lot of truth in what you were saying there, and also there's very much, rather than, and sometimes yes, there's different objectives as to why somebody might show up in a clinical setting versus why somebody might show up in a monastic setting, and as Robert was saying earlier, it's just like, yeah, there's two different activities happening, in therapy versus his personal meditation practice. So rather than, of course, it's all a case-by-case scenario. Each individual is different. Each practitioner is different. And everybody has a different history, temperament, personality, and different experiences. And I don't, and I'll agree with you that I think that, yeah, just going into no self doctrine is just not necessarily something that's really advisable in the beginning. But I think there's something about being clear about what our experience is, and maybe noticing what it is that we're identifying with that might not necessarily be helpful. And that way, the um, the increased sensory clarity, concentration, and equanimity skills that arise can be very helpful.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of one example. I was working with somebody who, let's see, she had a very, very destructive, addictive pattern, and they were in this treatment center for a very long time, and it had never come up in her therapy prior that she had some OCD type behavior. She would have these discrete rituals that she would play out in her head. Um, and that was a very significant contributing factor towards her overall distress, which would lead perpetuate a lot of her addictive behavior. So I guess I bring that up because a lot of what we were doing was involving this particular practice. So it wasn't about like, let's go to the no self and let's empty out and abide in sunyata and abide in the clear light of the void. But it was about like, oh, I'm clearly seeing this image arise, and there's this particular anxiety underneath it. And then I'm, playing this image out over and over, and I'm seeing that there's some volition to it, that I'm co-participating in it. And then she was able to see that there's this kind of want to play out this scenario in her head in order to avoid the anxiety in the body. And the more that she was able to attune to the anxiety in the body, there'd be less of an impulse to play out the rituals in her mind. And then they began to show up with decreased frequency, intensity, and duration. And then it just moved into just opening up into working somatically with her experience of anxiety. And she began to build up a lot more tool sets with being able to like calm that down, build up her capacity for self-forgiveness, self-compassion, and until she was able to state that her OCD just went into remission. So that was just like one example where I felt like it might be helpful for somebody to enter into this a practice, in also a larger context of lots of other goals and objectives and things that were being worked on in therapy. So that there was an example of not necessarily let's go into the no self doctrine as like, ridding ourselves of any identity, but it was a way in which somebody was able to increase her ability to really see what was going on behind the scenes, and then be able to notice this activity, and with the increased discernment and capacity to have equanimity with each kind of sensory movement, she was able to intervene in a way that began to become somewhat helpful for her. So I guess I'm saying that as like it's very much a case by case scenario, who it is that we're working with. But that right there is like one example where that insight practice was something that was I thought was appropriate and
Yeah.
helped her move towards her objectives.
Yeah, yes, I think what you're saying is a clear seeing is probably always helpful. And on that level, yes, I do agree with you that the clear seeing really helps, no matter whether it's a wounded self or a strong sense of self.
Yeah, for sure. And again, looking at all of these skills together, what is appropriate. Within this the insight, there's definitely a whittling away, whereas these other practices of like shamatha and metta might be more of like a building up and a cultivating. So if there's within the wounded self, our capacity to self-regulate some of the dysregulation, and the metta components are our capacity of self-love, our capacity of self-forgiveness, compassion. Can they be built up and strengthened so that they can reinforce or reify some of the more elements of our egoic structure that we would really like to have be stronger and more available. So again, it's a range of tools for different purposes and such. So today was kind of looking at that one particular tool that is not appropriate for all people at all times, but is definitely something to take into consideration.
And Mike,
Yeah,
I see in the big picture an integration of psychology and spirituality, the gifts of the West and the scientific approach, and the gifts of the East, and to find the balance between those. And for me, working with wounded people, the no self is not no ego, it is not personal. So there's a sort of a stair step that you can use for people who are fragile, so that they begin to understand it's not self in the sense that you're taking personal these distorted behaviors that don't reflect on you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's integrating, and of course each of us, I think without the years of therapy I had, I couldn't possibly have gone where I am now. So I mean, and each story is different. So anyway, just to say that integration, I love that idea of what we are is those who will integrate these gifts in new ways that have never been done before.
Yeah.
I appreciate that the spirit of taking the best of the West as well as the East, and how is it they can integrate in very creative ways. I think it really speaks to a very kind of fertile and creative time that we're in, for sure. Okay, good. Any last thoughts before we finish up for tonight? Okay, good. All right, so homework, everybody. So hopefully everybody is connected with the Google Classroom. If not, let me see what I can do there. Again, let's bring up the chat. If anybody's having any difficulty with accessing any of the material, here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, some things that might not, you might not have felt were appropriate to bring up in front of everybody today, you can contact me directly. If you have any challenges with accessing the Google Classroom, that's there. If I put a few different things in the Google Classroom this week. One of them was an encouragement, for people to get like the most out of this particular series, if they really want to get into it, is to lean into the daily practice and consider rolling in some of the specific meditations that we're doing. So part of the there's a YouTube link to each of these classes, and it's clearly denoted what the meditation period is. So you can just skip right into the meditation period and use that as a guided meditation if you feel that that would be helpful for you. That's definitely something.
Hey, Mike, really quick. Sorry, I know you've mentioned this 1,000 times, but do you have a direct link to the Google Classroom site? I can't seem to find that or access it.
Where is that? Okay, so this is the direct link that I have here. Putting that in the chat.
Thank you.
Sure. And then let's see, class code. Let's see, is the class code in that too? No, it's not. Let me see if I can get that to you as well. I'm only used to kind of creating the Google Classroom, so I'm not used to kind of being a participant. So I'm not sure what it asks of you. So KWV as in Victor, 6P as in Peter, V as in Victor, Y as in yellow. So it might ask you for that as well.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Absolutely. Okay. So please, I know that some people have signed up for the series, and thank you very much for your signing up. The fees that you've paid definitely go towards continued programming that's available. If anybody is able to donate a little bit more, that definitely helps to cover some of the people that were not able to pay the full fee that Inside LA has come up with. I definitely stand by offering these teachings freely. Nobody will be turned away for a lack of funds at all. Howsoever, the more that people are able to donate, they can, they're creating the conditions so that these programs will continue to be available for everybody.
Is that donation link on the Insight LA website?
Yes, it should be there as well. And let's see, I have another link. Hopefully it's the appropriate link. That will also get there. Okay, so links to donate. So I'm going to put that as well in the chat. You can follow that for a donation link there. Okay. Okay, everybody, let us end on a dedication of merit. By the merit of these acts and other such virtues, may we attain an awakening for the benefit of all beings. We bow before those who've come before us on the path and to those who've come after us on the path. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Have yourselves a wonderful week. Hope to see you all next week.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Bye.